The leather smelled like rain and horses, and Beatrice Whitmore had spent the last 3 hours trying to convince herself that was enough to make her happy. She sat in the doorway of her small workshop on the dusty edge of Chico, California, her hands moving with practiced precision as she stitched a torn saddle that belonged to a miner heading north to the goldfields. The year was 1876, and the town hummed with the kind of restless energy that came from being a stopping point between somewhere and nowhere. Her father had taught her the trade before consumption took him 2 years prior, leaving her with nothing but a workshop, a reputation for honest work, and the kind of loneliness that settled into bones like winter cold. At 23, she had turned down 3 marriage proposals from men who saw her property as more valuable than her skill, and she had made peace with the idea that she might spend her life fixing other people's journeys without ever starting one of her own. The miner returned at sunset to collect his saddle, paying her fairly and tipping his hat before riding off into the amber light. Beatrice watched him go, then turned to sweep the leather scraps from her workspace. The September heat still clung to the air despite the approaching evening, and she could hear the saloon piano playing 2 streets over, its cheerful melody at odds with the weight in her chest. She was closing the workshop door when she heard the horse. The sound of hooves on packed earth was common enough, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the slowness of the gait, or the way the rider seemed to be looking for something specific. When she turned, she saw him. He sat tall in the saddle despite the exhaustion evident in every line of his body. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the strong jaw, the dark stubble, and the way his broad shoulders carried the kind of weariness that came from more than just long miles. His horse was a beautiful bay mare, well cared for despite the dust of travel, and the saddle beneath him had a split in the left stirrup leather that made him sit unevenly. "You the saddle maker?" His voice was rough, like gravel rolling in a creek bed. "I repair them," Beatrice said, straightening. "Are you needing work done?" He dismounted with a slight wince that he tried to hide, and she noticed he favored his left leg. Up close, he was younger than she had initially thought, maybe 27 or 28, with dark eyes that held shadows she recognized. They were the same shadows she saw in her own mirror. "Stirrup leather is about to give out completely," he said, running a hand down his horse's neck. The gesture was gentle, speaking to a man who cared for his animals. And the whole thing could use some conditioning. Been on the trail from Montana for near about 6 weeks. "Montana," Beatrice repeated, taking the reins he offered her. "That is a long way to come." "Sometimes distance is the point." He pulled his saddlebags off with careful movements. "How long will it take?" She examined the saddle, noting not just the obvious damage but the places where the leather had dried and cracked, where stitching had begun to fray. This was quality work originally, well made and well used. 2 days if you want it done right. I do not rush good work." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. 2 days then. Is there a boarding house in town? Mrs. Chen runs one on 3rd Street. Clean beds, good food. Tell her Beatrice sent you and she will give you a fair rate. She started to lead his horse toward the small stable beside her workshop, then paused. "I did not catch your name." "Zachary Winters." He touched the brim of his hat. "Obliged for the recommendation, Miss Whitmore." She had not told him her surname, which meant he had asked about her before riding up. That knowledge settled somewhere between flattering and unsettling. "How did you know to find me?" "Man at the general store said you were the only saddle worker in 3 counties who would not try to cheat me or do half the job." He shifted his saddlebags to his other shoulder. "Said your father taught you, and you were twice as skilled as he was." "Mr. Henderson is generous in his assessment," Beatrice said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "But I will do right by your saddle, Mr. Winters. Just Zachary is fine." He nodded once more, then turned and walked toward town with that slight limp, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. Beatrice stood in the doorway of her workshop for a long moment, watching him go. Then she shook her head at her own foolishness and led his mare into the stable. The horse was friendly, nickering softly as Beatrice removed the saddle and gave her water and feed. She ran her hands over the mare's legs, checking for heat or swelling, and found nothing but healthy muscle and good care. The saddle told her more about Zachary Winters than he probably intended. The wear patterns showed a man who spent more time on horseback than on foot. The careful repairs that had been attempted with rough materials spoke of someone who valued his equipment, but had been far from proper supplies. And the initials carved into the underside of the cantle, small and almost hidden, read ZW, Montana Territory, 1874. She carried the saddle into her workshop and lit the lamps, knowing she would not sleep yet anyway. The loneliness always felt worse at night, when the town quieted, and she was left alone with the echo of her own footsteps. At least work gave her hands something to do, and her mind something to focus on, besides the empty spaces her life had become. Beatrice worked until her eyes began to blur, carefully separating the damaged stirrup leather and measuring for the replacement. She had good leather in her stores, properly tanned and treated. Her father had always insisted on quality materials, and she had maintained his standards. Tomorrow she would begin the real work, but tonight she could at least prepare. When she finally made her way to her small living quarters behind the workshop, she found herself thinking about dark eyes and rough voices, about the kind of weariness that came from running towards something or away from it. She knew that look because she had worn it herself after her father died, when every day felt like moving through deep water. Sleep came eventually, filled with dreams of long trails and distant mountains. The next morning brought clarity in the form of focused work. Beatrice rose with the sun, fed Zachary's mare, and set about the careful process of conditioning and repairing his saddle. She had just finished working oil into the dry leather when she heard footsteps approaching her open door. "Morning," Zachary said, and she looked up to find him standing in the doorway, backlit by the California sun. He had cleaned up, she noticed. His jaw was freshly shaved and his dark hair was still damp. He wore a clean shirt, and without the trail dust, she could see he was handsome in a stark, weathered sort of way. "Good morning," she replied, aware that she probably had leather oil on her face and her hair was escaping its pins. "I told you 2 days. I remember." He stepped into the workshop, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. "I was not checking up on you. I was walking past and wondered if you might tell me where I could find decent coffee in this town. The restaurant next to Mrs. Chen's serves good coffee. Mr. Lopez imports the beans himself." She set down her conditioning cloth. "But if you want the best coffee in Chico, you come back in 10 minutes and I will make you some." The offer surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. She was not in the habit of inviting strange men to share coffee, but something about Zachary Winters made her want to extend the gesture. Maybe it was the loneliness she recognized in him, or maybe it was simply that she was tired of eating every meal alone. "I would like that," he said simply. 10 minutes. She watched him leave, then hurried to her living quarters to make herself presentable. She washed her face, re-pinned her hair, and put coffee on to boil. Her hands shook slightly as she set out 2 cups, and she told herself it was just because she was unused to company, not because of the way his eyes had softened when he accepted her invitation. He returned in exactly 10 minutes, and she noticed he had brought 2 pastries wrapped in cloth from the bakery. "Seemed only fair," he said, offering them to her. They sat on the bench outside her workshop, drinking coffee and eating pastries while the town slowly came to life around them. For a while, neither of them spoke, and Beatrice found the silence comfortable rather than awkward. "You really came all the way from Montana?" she finally asked. "I did." He stared into his coffee cup. "Had a ranch up there with my brother. He died last spring. Fever." After that, staying felt like trying to hold on to something that was already gone. "I am sorry about your brother." The words felt inadequate, but she meant them. "I lost my father 2 years ago. Consumption. This workshop was his life's work. And you kept it going. It was not a question." "That takes strength, or stubbornness." She smiled slightly. "Some days I am not sure which. Maybe they are the same thing." He finished his coffee and set the cup down. "This is good. Better than good, actually. My mother was from Mexico originally. She taught me how to make it properly before she passed when I was young." Beatrice looked out at the street, watching a freight wagon rumble past. "Some skills stay with you." "Like saddle making," Zachary said. "Like saddle making," she agreed. He stood, wincing again as weight settled on his left leg. This time she felt bold enough to ask, "What happened to your leg?" "Horse rolled on me about 3 years back. Broke in 2 places. It healed mostly right, but some days it reminds me it is there." He picked up both coffee cups. "I should let you get back to work. I am paying you for your time after all." "You are paying me for a saddle repair, not for my time," Beatrice corrected. "But I do need to finish if you want to ride out in 2 days." "Actually," Zachary said, and something shifted in his expression. "I was thinking I might stay in Chico for a while, if you know anyone who might be hiring." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. The lumber mill is usually looking for workers, and the freight company needs drivers. "What kind of work do you do?" "I can do most things. Ranch work, carpentry, driving. I am good with horses and better with leather." He looked at her workshop. "But I imagine you do not need help." The practical answer was no, she did not need help. She barely made enough to support herself, much less pay a worker. But the way he was looking at her, with something like hope in those dark eyes, made her reconsider. "I do not have much work for 2 people," she said slowly. "But if you know leather craft, I have been thinking about expanding. There is demand for new saddles, not just repairs, but I have not had the time or hands to take on that kind of work. I know leather craft. My father was a saddle maker before he went into ranching. He taught both me and my brother." Zachary's expression remained neutral, but she could sense the interest. "If you were willing to take me on, I would work for a percentage until we see if the business can support too." It was a terrible business decision. She barely knew this man. He could be unreliable or unskilled despite his claims, or simply planning to rob her once he learned where she kept her earnings. But Beatrice had spent 2 years being practical and careful and lonely, and something in her was tired of always choosing the safe path. "We will try it for a month," she heard herself say. "You work mornings, and I will pay you a fair wage for your time plus a percentage of any new commissions we take on together. If it works, we continue. If it does not, no hard feelings." The smile that spread across his face transformed him, chasing away the shadows and showing her the man he might have been before grief carved itself into his features. "You will not regret this, Miss Whitmore." "Beatrice," she corrected. "If we are going to work together, you should call me Beatrice." "Beatrice," he repeated, and the way he said her name, careful and warm, made her breath catch. After he left to collect his things from the boarding house and look at the room for rent above the general store, Beatrice sat in her workshop and wondered what she had just done. She had built her life on careful decisions and measured risks, and hiring a stranger who had ridden into town yesterday was neither careful nor measured. But as she returned to working on his saddle, conditioning the leather until it was supple and strong again. She found herself humming. It had been a long time since she had felt anything like anticipation, and even longer since she had looked forward to the next day. That evening, Zachary returned to the workshop with a bedroll and a toolbox. "The room above Henderson's store is mine starting tomorrow," he said. "He said I could store my things here tonight if that is acceptable." "Of course." Beatrice gestured to the corner. "Your saddle will be ready tomorrow afternoon. You can start the day after if you need time to settle in." "I will start tomorrow morning," Zachary said firmly. "The settling can happen around the work." True to his word, he appeared at her workshop door at dawn the next day, ready to work. Beatrice showed him her supplies, her tools, and the 3 repair jobs waiting for attention. She watched carefully as he examined each piece, noting how his hands moved over the leather with the confidence of real knowledge. "This one has a cracked tree," he said, pointing to a saddle a rancher had dropped off last week. "The leather work is cosmetic. The real problem is underneath." Beatrice had known that, had been dreading telling the rancher he needed a new saddle rather than a repair. "I was planning to talk to the owner today." "Good." Zachary set it aside and picked up the next piece, a bridle with a broken bit attachment. "This is straightforward. I can have it done by midday." They worked in companionable silence through the morning, the rhythm of their tasks creating a kind of music. Beatrice found herself relaxing into the presence of another person in her space, something she had not expected. She had been alone for so long that she had assumed she preferred it, but having Zachary there felt natural, as if the workshop had always been meant to hold 2 people. At midday, she made sandwiches and lemonade, and they ate in the shade beside her workshop. The September heat had intensified, and even in the shade, the air felt thick. "Tell me about Montana," Beatrice said. Watching a dust devil spin itself across the street, Zachary leaned back against the wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "It is beautiful in a harsh sort of way. Wide skies and mountains that make you feel small. Cold winters that come early and stay late. My brother and I had 200 acres and about 50 head of cattle." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Had being the important word. You sold it." "I did. Could not work it alone, and staying there without him felt wrong. Everything reminded me of what I lost." He looked at her. "You understand that, I think, the way grief can make a place feel haunted." "I do," she admitted. "After my father died, I almost sold this place too. Started fresh somewhere where everything did not remind me of him. But then I realized the memories were all I had left. Selling felt like losing him twice." "So you stayed and kept his work alive." Zachary's voice was soft. "That was brave. It was necessary. There is a difference." Beatrice stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "We should get back to it. I want to finish your saddle before the day gets any hotter." The saddle was her best work, she thought as she attached the new stirrup leather with stitches so tight, and even they looked like a machine had made them. She had conditioned every inch of the leather until it glowed, repaired the small tears she had found in the seat, and reinforced the stress points that would have failed in another few months. When she finally stepped back to examine it, she felt the quiet pride that came from work done right. Zachary was finishing the bridle repair when she called him over. He set down his tools and came to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell the leather oil on his hands and the faint scent of soap. "That is beautiful work," he said quietly. "Better than when it was new, I would wager." "It was good work to begin with. I just brought it back to what it was meant to be." Beatrice ran her hand over the pommel one last time. "It should last you another 10 years if you care for it properly." "I will." He looked at her rather than the saddle. "Thank you, Beatrice." The way he said her name still did something to her insides, a fluttering warmth she had not felt in years. Maybe had never felt, she realized. The men who had proposed to her had inspired obligation or irritation, never this strange combination of comfort and excitement. She cleared her throat. "I will write up your bill." "Before you do that," Zachary said, and now he sounded uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "I was wondering if you might have dinner with me tonight, not as employer and employee, but as two people who might enjoy each other's company. There is a restaurant by the boarding house that Mrs. Chen recommends." Beatrice knew she should say no. She barely knew this man. She had already made the questionable decision to hire him, and adding personal involvement would complicate everything. The practical voice in her head, the one that sounded like her father, told her to maintain proper boundaries. But the other voice, the one that sounded like her own loneliness, whispered that she was tired of being practical. That life was more than work and solitude. That maybe taking a chance on someone was not foolish but simply human. "I would like that," she said. His smile was worth the risk. They closed the workshop early, both of them needing time to prepare. Beatrice washed and changed into her best dress, a deep blue cotton that her father had bought her for her 21st birthday. She had worn it maybe 3 times since, never having occasion for anything fancier than work clothes. She pinned her dark hair up properly, letting a few curls frame her face, and looked at herself in the small mirror. She looked nervous, she decided. Nervous and hopeful and young in a way she had not felt since before her father's death. Zachary knocked on her door precisely at 6, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt that showed the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was combed back, still damp, and he held his hat in his hands like a schoolboy. "You look beautiful," he said, with such simple honesty that she believed him. "You clean up well yourself," she replied, and was rewarded with that transformative smile. The restaurant was small but clean, run by a Chinese family who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed after the mines played out. Mrs. Chen greeted them warmly, showing them to a table by the window where they could watch the street as evening settled over Chico. They ordered beef and vegetables over rice, and tea that came in delicate cups that seemed too fragile for Zachary's work-roughened hands. But he handled them carefully, and Beatrice found herself charmed by the contrast between his rugged exterior and his gentle manners. "Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with saddles or loss," Zachary said after their food arrived. Beatrice considered the question. "I like to read. Novels mostly, though they are hard to come by out here. Mr. Henderson orders them for me sometimes from Sacramento, and I can play the piano, though I have not had access to one since my father sold ours to pay for his medicine." "What kind of novels?" "Adventures, mostly. Stories about people going to exotic places and having grand experiences." She smiled ruefully. "I suppose that seems silly, reading about adventures while doing nothing but sitting in a workshop." "It does not seem silly at all," Zachary said firmly. "Sometimes imagination is the only travel we can afford. What is your favorite book?" "The Count of Monte Cristo. I have read it 4 times." She took a bite of beef, savoring the ginger and garlic. "What about you? What do you do when you are not working?" "I like to draw," he admitted, and color rose in his cheeks. "Sketches mostly of landscapes and animals. Nothing very good, but it helps me notice things, details I might otherwise miss." "I would like to see your drawings sometime." Beatrice meant it. She was curious about what this quiet, careful man chose to capture on paper. "Maybe I will show you," he said, "if you show me what other books you have." They talked through dinner and into the evening, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. She learned that he was 28, that his favorite color was the deep blue of mountain shadows, that he missed his brother every day but was learning to carry the grief rather than fight it. He learned that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that she had once wanted to be a teacher but her father's illness had ended that dream, that she sometimes talked to herself when she worked because the silence felt too heavy. When they finally left the restaurant, the sky was deep purple and scattered with stars. Zachary walked her home slowly, neither of them seeming eager to end the evening. "Thank you for dinner," Beatrice said when they reached her workshop. "I enjoyed it very much." "So did I." He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cooling night air. "Beatrice, I want to be honest with you about something." Her stomach tightened. Here it came, whatever complication she should have anticipated. "I came to Chico because I needed to leave Montana," he continued. "But I stayed because of you. When Henderson told me about you, about a woman who kept her father's business alive and did honest work, I was curious. When I met you, I was drawn to you in a way I have not been drawn to anyone in a very long time, maybe ever." Beatrice's breath caught. "Zachary, I know it has only been 2 days," he said quickly. "I know that is not enough time to know someone properly. But I also know that I have not felt this alive since before my brother died. Being around you makes me want to stop running and start building something real again." She should be cautious. She should remind him that they barely knew each other. She should protect herself from potential heartbreak. Instead, she found herself stepping closer. "I feel it too," she whispered. "This connection between us. It frightens me because it is so sudden, but it also feels right in a way I cannot explain. Then let us not fight it." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. "Let us see where it leads." "Yes," she said simply. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle and careful, his lips warm against hers. It was Beatrice's first real kiss, and it felt like something clicking into place, like finding a piece of herself she had not known was missing. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Good night, Beatrice," Zachary said softly. "Good night, Zachary." She watched him walk away into the darkness, then went inside and sat on her bed, touching her lips and marveling at how completely her life had changed in 48 hours. The next morning, they fell into a new rhythm. Work in the mornings, lunch together, more work in the afternoon. But now there were small touches as they passed each other, lingering glances, conversations that stretched long into the evening. The workshop felt different with Zachary there, fuller somehow, as if it had been incomplete before and she had simply not noticed. Word spread quickly in a town like Chico, and soon people were coming by specifically to see the stranger who had become Beatrice's partner. Some were curious, some were judgmental, and some, like Mr. Henderson, were genuinely pleased to see her finding happiness. "Your father would have liked him," Henderson said one afternoon, examining a new saddle Zachary had nearly completed. "He would have appreciated a man who understands quality work and treats you with respect." "I think so too," Beatrice agreed, watching Zachary through the doorway as he fitted a horse with a repaired bridle, his movements patient and sure. The work did increase, just as she had hoped. With two of them able to take on more projects, they began accepting commissions for new saddles in addition to repairs. Zachary had ideas for improvements, small innovations in design that made their saddles more comfortable for both horse and rider. Beatrice contributed her own refinements, and together they created pieces that began to develop a reputation. 3 weeks after Zachary had first ridden into town, a wealthy rancher from Sacramento placed an order for 6 custom saddles for his sons. It was more work than Beatrice had ever taken on at once, and the payment would be enough to expand the workshop and buy supplies for months. "We did it," Zachary said that evening after the rancher left, spinning Beatrice around in an impromptu dance. "We actually did it." She laughed, dizzy from the spinning and from the joy in his eyes. We did. I cannot believe it. He set her down but kept his arms around her waist. They had been careful over the past weeks, keeping their relationship appropriate, not pushing too fast. But now, in the privacy of the workshop with the evening light casting everything in gold, something shifted. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough, "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen. I know it has not been long, but I know my own heart, and it is yours if you want it." Tears pricked her eyes. "I am already in love with you, Zachary. I think I started falling that first morning when you came back for coffee." He kissed her then, deeper and more passionate than their first kiss, and she melted into him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "I know we should wait longer, do things properly, but I am tired of waiting for my life to start. I want to build something with you, not just a business, but a real life. A future." "Yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Chen and Mr. Henderson standing as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple white dress she sewed herself, and Zachary wore a new suit he bought specifically for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Beatrice felt as if her life was finally beginning after years of merely existing. They moved Zachary's things into the living quarters behind the workshop, combining their possessions into a home that belonged to both of them. It was strange at first, learning to share space with another person, but mostly it was wonderful. Beatrice had not realized how much she had missed simple companionship, someone to talk to over breakfast, someone to share the small moments of the day. Their wedding night was gentle and careful, both of them nervous but eager. Zachary was patient, taking time to learn what made her sigh, what made her gasp. When they finally came together completely, Beatrice understood why poets wrote about love and joining. It was not just physical but spiritual, a connection that bound them together in a way that transcended the body. Afterward, lying in Zachary's arms in the darkness, Beatrice felt peace settle over her like a blanket. This was what she had been missing, this sense of belonging, of being chosen and choosing in return. "Are you happy?" Zachary asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Happier than I knew I could be," she answered honestly. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought I would be again." He kissed the top of her head. "You mended more than just my saddle, Beatrice. You mended my heart." The next months were busy and full. They completed the commission for the rancher in Sacramento, each saddle a masterpiece that reflected their combined skills. The payment allowed them to expand the workshop, adding more workspace and better tools. Zachary built shelves for storage and a proper display area where customers could see examples of their work. Business grew steadily. Travelers would stop in Chico specifically to commission work from the Winters workshop, and local ranchers began replacing their old saddles with new ones made by Beatrice and Zachary. They hired a young man named Thomas to help with basic repairs and maintain their supplies, freeing them to focus on the more complex work. But the best part was not the business success. It was the life they built together. Beatrice had never imagined marriage could be such a partnership, such a blending of two people into something stronger than either alone. They worked together, ate together, made love together, and slowly healed together from the losses they had both carried. Zachary started drawing again, really drawing, not just idle sketches. He would sit outside in the evenings and capture the changing light on the mountains, the way horses moved, the curve of Beatrice's smile when she was focused on her work. He showed her his drawings with shy pride, and she marveled at his talent, at the way he could make simple pencil lines convey emotion and movement. Beatrice resumed her reading, and sometimes in the evenings, she would read aloud while Zachary drew. They discovered a shared love of poetry, and on Sundays, they would take long walks outside town, reciting verses to each other and talking about everything and nothing. The first Christmas of their marriage, Zachary surprised her with a piano. It was not new and it needed tuning, but when he brought it into their home, Beatrice wept. He had been saving secretly, asking Henderson to order it from Sacramento. "I wanted you to have music again," he said, looking worried that her tears meant she was unhappy. "If you do not like it," she stopped his words with a kiss. "I love it. I love you. This is the best gift anyone has ever given me." She played that evening, her fingers stumbling at first over keys she had not touched in years, but slowly finding the melodies she had thought she had forgotten. Zachary sat beside her on the bench, his hand resting on the small of her back, and she played until her fingers ached. Spring came with wildflowers covering the hills around Chico, and with the news that Beatrice was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Zachary. When she finally shared the news over dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped. He stood so quickly his chair fell over, then pulled her into his arms with a whoop of joy. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her face, his own eyes wet. "I never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a child. After losing my brother, I thought that part of life was over for me, but you gave it all back to me." "You gave it to me too," Beatrice said. "I was just existing before you came. Now I am living." The pregnancy was relatively easy, for which Beatrice was grateful. She continued working through most of it, though Zachary became increasingly protective as her belly grew. He took on more of the physical labor, insisting she focus on the detail work that did not require heavy lifting. Thomas proved invaluable during this time, handling basic repairs and helping with customer interactions. He was eager to learn and respectful of both of them, and they began teaching him more advanced techniques, thinking he might eventually take over some of their work. As summer heat settled over Chico, Beatrice grew larger and more uncomfortable. But even in her discomfort, she was happy. She would feel the baby move inside her and marvel at the life she and Zachary had created together. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with such tenderness that it made her throat tight. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening as they sat outside, trying to catch any breeze. "That I am the luckiest man alive," he said simply. "That I found you when I had given up on finding anything. That our child will grow up knowing love and security, things I did not always have." "Tell me about your childhood," she said. She knew about his brother, about the ranch, but he rarely spoke of his early years. Zachary was quiet for a long moment. "My father was a hard man. Not cruel, but not warm either. He taught us his trade, but did not show affection. My mother died when I was 10, and after that, he became even more distant. My brother raised me more than my father did." "I am sorry," Beatrice said softly. "It made me determined to be different," Zachary continued. "When we have this baby and any others that follow, I want them to know every day that they are loved. I want to be the kind of father who shows affection, who listens, who makes his children feel safe." "You will be," Beatrice said with certainty. "You already love this baby so much, and it is not even born yet." Their son arrived in September, exactly 1 year after Zachary had first ridden into Chico. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Beatrice thought she might not survive it. But with Zachary holding her hand and the midwife coaching her through, she finally delivered a healthy baby boy with strong lungs and dark hair like his father. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's brother. When Beatrice suggested it, Zachary had looked at her with such love and gratitude that she knew she had chosen right. He would have been a wonderful uncle, Zachary said, holding his son for the first time with trembling hands. I wish he could have met you both. Tell Samuel about him, Beatrice said from the bed, exhausted but happy. Keep his memory alive through stories. That way he will know his uncle even if he never met him. Samuel was a good baby, alert and curious about the world around him. Beatrice would bring him into the workshop in a basket, and he would watch them work with serious dark eyes. As he grew, those eyes would follow the movement of their hands, the tools, the leather. He is going to be a craftsman, Zachary said proudly when Samuel was 6 months old and reaching for everything within grasp. Or he will be something completely different, Beatrice countered. And that will be fine too. I want him to choose his own path. Of course, Zachary agreed quickly. I just meant he has good hands and a curious mind. Whatever he chooses to do, he will do it well. Life settled into a new rhythm with Samuel. The workshop continued to thrive, with customers coming from further and further away. They trained Thomas to the point where he could handle most repairs independently, and they began discussing taking on another apprentice. Beatrice had feared that motherhood would mean giving up her work, but instead, she found that it simply evolved. She worked around Samuel's schedule, and when he was old enough, she taught him to sit quietly nearby while she stitched. He learned patience and focus from watching them, and he learned craftsmanship from the way they approached every project. When Samuel was 2, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier, perhaps because she was not facing the unknown. Their daughter was born in spring, a tiny thing with Beatrice's eyes and Zachary's stubborn chin. They named her Rose, and she was sunshine personified. Where Samuel was serious and thoughtful, Rose was laughter and energy. She toddled around the workshop as soon as she could walk, getting into everything and charming every customer who came through the door. We have a diplomat and a craftsman, Zachary said, watching Rose hand a piece of scrap leather to an amused rancher while Samuel carefully examined a saddle tree. We have 2 perfect children, Beatrice corrected, though she agreed with his assessment. The years flowed by, marked by the seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel started school and showed an aptitude for mathematics and reading. Rose proved to be musical, picking out simple melodies on the piano by the time she was 4. Both children were loved and secure, exactly as Zachary had promised they would be. The workshop became one of the most respected in Northern California. They had customers who would wait months for one of their custom saddles, and their reputation for honest work and quality craftsmanship was known throughout the state. They had moved into a larger building that accommodated the growing business, with proper living quarters upstairs, and the workshop taking up the entire ground floor. Thomas eventually moved on to start his own saddle shop in a town 50 miles north, armed with skills and a generous loan from Beatrice and Zachary to get started. They took on 2 new apprentices, both young men eager to learn the trade, and the workshop hummed with activity and purpose. But the business was never the most important thing. The most important thing was the life they had built, the love that grew deeper with every passing year. Beatrice would sometimes stop in the middle of her work and just watch Zachary, marveling that this man was her husband, that they had created this life together. "What?" he would ask, noticing her attention. "Just grateful," she would reply. "For you, for us, for all of this." "Me too," he would say, and the look in his eyes would remind her of that first kiss, that first promise of forever. One evening when Samuel was 8 and Rose was 6, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed but more likely playing some elaborate game. "Do you remember the day we met?" Beatrice asked, her hand in Zachary's. "Every detail," he said. "You were sitting in your workshop doorway, and you looked up at me with these serious eyes, all business and competence. But I saw the loneliness underneath, because I recognized it. I thought you were just another passing stranger," she admitted. "Someone who would leave and never come back. I fixed saddles for dozens of people like that, and I never expected any of them to stay. But I came back," Zachary said. "You came back," she agreed. "And you asked me to mend more than just leather. Do you remember what you said to me that first Christmas?" "I said you mended my heart." He squeezed her hand. "It was true then, and it is true now. You took a man who was running from grief and gave him a reason to stop running. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. You gave me everything." "You did the same for me," Beatrice said softly. "I was so lonely, Zachary. I did not even realize how lonely until you appeared and showed me what it could be like to have a true partner in every sense. You respected my work, valued my skills, loved me for who I was rather than what you wanted me to be." "It was not hard to do," he said. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun slipped below the horizon. Inside, they could hear Samuel reading to Rose, his patient voice explaining words she did not understand yet. The sound of their children, the warmth of Zachary's hand, the peace of the evening all combined into a moment of perfect contentment. "Do you think we will have more children?" Beatrice asked. "Would you want to?" Zachary looked at her with interest. "Maybe one more," she said thoughtfully. "I like our family, but it feels like it might not be quite complete yet." "Then let us see what happens," Zachary said. "If we are blessed with another child, wonderful. If not, we have Samuel and Rose, and that is more than enough." As it turned out, they were blessed with another child. Their second daughter arrived 3 years later, another spring baby with a lusty cry and determined personality. They named her Clara, and she completed their family in a way Beatrice had not quite been able to articulate before. With 3 children and a thriving business, life was full and sometimes chaotic, but it was also rich with love and purpose. Samuel, now 11, was becoming a skilled craftsman in his own right, working alongside them after school. Rose was excelling at piano and had begun performing at church services. Clara was a whirlwind of energy who kept them all on their toes. Beatrice was now 33, and sometimes she would look at her life and marvel at how different it was from what she had expected. At 23, alone in her workshop, she had thought her life was already determined. She would work, she would survive, and that would be enough. She had never imagined the richness that love could bring, the way a partnership could transform not just her circumstances, but her entire understanding of what life could be. Zachary, at 38, had filled out slightly with contentment, his face showing laugh lines rather than just the grief that had marked him when they first met. He still limped occasionally when the weather changed, but he wore it as a badge of honor rather than a burden. His drawings had evolved into real art, and Beatrice had secretly sent some of his work to a gallery in San Francisco. When they wrote back asking to display several pieces, she presented him with the letter at dinner. "You did what?" he asked, stunned. "I sent them your drawings," she said, trying not to look too pleased with herself. "The landscapes and the horse studies. They think they are remarkable and they want to show them in their next exhibition." "Beatrice," he said, his voice thick, "I do not know what to say." "Say yes," she encouraged. "Let people see your talent. You have given me so much support in my work. Let me support yours." He did say yes, and 3 of his drawings sold within a week of the exhibition opening. It was not about the money, though that was welcome. It was about recognition, about someone outside their small world seeing value in what he created. "You keep making me braver," he told her that night. "Keep pushing me to be more than I thought I could be." "That is what love does," Beatrice said. "It sees potential and calls it forth. You have done the same for me 100 times over." As the children grew, the workshop evolved again. Samuel decided he wanted to attend university in Sacramento to study engineering, though he promised to return to Chico afterward. Rose announced she wanted to be a music teacher, and they found her a tutor who could help her develop her skills. Clara, at 6, declared she was going to be a doctor, and neither of them doubted she would accomplish exactly that. "We raised them to be independent thinkers," Zachary said, watching Samuel pack for university with mixed pride and sadness. "We cannot be surprised when they think independently." "I know," Beatrice said, her throat tight, "but I will miss him terribly." "So will I. But he is ready, and he knows we are here whenever he needs us." Samuel left for Sacramento in the fall of 1893, nearly 17 years after Zachary had first ridden into Chico. The workshop felt emptier without his steady presence, but letters arrived weekly, full of his excitement about his studies and his plans for the future. Rose, at 15, was teaching piano to younger children while continuing her own studies. She had inherited Beatrice's serious focus and Zachary's artistic sensibility, and she approached music with dedication that reminded Beatrice of how she herself approached leather work. Clara, now 9, was exactly as determined as she had predicted. She read every book about medicine and science she could find, and she peppered the town doctor with questions whenever he came into the workshop. Dr. Morrison was charmed by her intensity and had promised to mentor her when she was older. Beatrice and Zachary found themselves with more time alone as the children developed their own interests and independence. They took walks in the evenings, revisited old conversations, and rediscovered each other in new ways. Their physical relationship, which had been somewhat constrained by small children and thin walls, deepened again. They learned each other's bodies with the patience and thoroughness they brought to their craft, finding new ways to bring pleasure and connection. "We have grown together rather than apart," Beatrice observed one night, lying contentedly in Zachary's arms. "Because we chose to," he replied. "Every day we chose each other. That is the secret, I think. Not falling in love once but choosing love over and over again." "You have become a philosopher in your old age," she teased. "I am not old. I am distinguished." He tickled her side, making her squeal. Their laughter brought a knock from Rose's room on the other side of the wall. "Some of us are trying to sleep," she called, though they could hear the amusement in her voice. They smothered their laughter against each other, feeling young and playful despite being in their 30s and 40s. The next years brought more changes. Samuel returned from university with his engineering degree and immediately began working on improvements to their saddle-making equipment. He designed a new cutting system that made their work faster and more precise, and he patented the design, bringing in additional income for the family. Rose married a kind young man named Daniel who shared her love of music, and they moved to Sacramento where both of them taught at a music academy. Beatrice cried at the wedding, but they were happy tears. Her daughter had found what she and Zachary had found, a true partnership built on mutual respect and love. Clara, true to her word, went to medical school. It was not easy for a woman to pursue medicine, but her determination and brilliance opened doors. Dr. Morrison wrote her letters of recommendation, and she was accepted to a program in San Francisco. The day she left, Zachary cried, something Beatrice had seen him do only a handful of times. "Our baby is going to be a doctor," he said, wiping his eyes. "How did we get so lucky?" "We raised them with love and gave them the freedom to become themselves," Beatrice said. "That is all any parent can do." With all three children launched into their own lives, Beatrice and Zachary found themselves in a new phase. The workshop was still busy, but they had trained capable apprentices who could handle much of the work. They began to travel, taking trips to San Francisco to see Clara and visit the galleries that now regularly displayed Zachary's drawings. They went to Sacramento to attend Rose's concerts and see Samuel's engineering innovations being used by other craftsmen. But they always returned to Chico, to the workshop that had been the foundation of everything they built together. Beatrice was now 45, her dark hair threaded with silver. Zachary was 50, his face weathered but still handsome, his eyes still holding that warmth that had drawn her to him from the start. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one evening as they worked together on a commissioned saddle for a wealthy client. "Coming to Chico, staying here, building this life instead of something grander." Zachary set down his tools and looked at her with such love that it took her breath away, even after all these years. "Regret? Beatrice, you gave me everything. You mended my broken heart when I did not think it could be mended. You gave me a home, children, a life full of meaning and love. I would not trade a single day of our life together for anything grander. This, what we have built together, is everything I ever wanted but did not know how to dream." She crossed the workshop and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I feel the same way," she said. "That day you rode into town, broken and grieving, looking for someone to fix your saddle, I had no idea you would end up fixing me too. I was so lonely, so resigned to a life of solitude. But you saw me, really saw me, and you chose me. You chose us. And every day since has been a gift." They finished the saddle together as the sun set, their hands moving in the synchronized rhythm they had developed over decades of working side by side. When they finally closed the workshop for the night, they walked hand in hand to their home, comfortable in the silence that comes from knowing someone completely. That night, they made love with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Beatrice felt profound gratitude for the life they had created. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Zachary's voice was sleepy. "For coming back," she said. "For staying, for loving me." "Thank you for mending more than just my saddle," he replied, echoing the words he had said all those years ago. "For mending my lonely heart and filling it with more love than I knew was possible." They drifted to sleep wrapped around each other, two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, and had built something beautiful from their shared loneliness and grief. The years continued to flow, marked by grandchildren and anniversaries, by the steady rhythm of work and love. Samuel had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl who visited every summer and learned saddle making from their grandparents. Rose had twin daughters who showed musical talent even as toddlers. Clara, after completing her medical degree, returned to Northern California and opened a practice, eventually marrying a fellow doctor and having a son. Beatrice and Zachary watched their family grow with joy and pride. They had created not just a business but a legacy of love, skill, and integrity. Their grandchildren would grow up knowing what a true partnership looked like, what it meant to support and cherish someone through all of life's changes. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the workshop. Friends and family filled the space where Beatrice and Zachary had worked side by side for decades. There were speeches and laughter, gifts and memories shared. But the best moment came late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and Beatrice and Zachary found themselves alone in the workshop. They stood in the doorway, looking out at the street where he had first ridden up on his tired horse with his damaged saddle. 25 years, Beatrice said wonderingly. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I would do it all again, Zachary said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it exactly the same. Even the hard parts, she asked. Especially the hard parts, he said firmly. Because we faced them together and they made us stronger. You are still the best decision I ever made, Beatrice Winters. And you are mine, Zachary Winters. They kissed in the doorway as the stars came out overhead. Two people who had found each other when they both needed someone most, and who had spent 25 years proving that love, respect, and partnership could build something lasting and beautiful. Years later, when Beatrice was 63 and Zachary was 68, they finally retired from active work in the workshop. They turned it over to Samuel, who had returned to Chico as promised, and to his eldest son who showed remarkable talent. But they still came by most days, offering advice and working on special projects that interested them. Their home was full of life, with grandchildren visiting constantly, their artwork and accomplishments covering the walls. The piano Rose had learned on was now being used by her daughters, the music continuing across generations. Clara's medical practice was thriving, and she had trained several other women who wanted to pursue medicine. One evening, sitting on their porch in the warm summer air, Beatrice reflected on the life they had built. "Do you remember what you said to me, that day you asked me to marry you?" "I said a lot of things," Zachary replied, his hand finding hers automatically. "You said you were tired of waiting for your life to start, that you wanted to build something real." She squeezed his hand. "We did that. We built something real and lasting and beautiful." "We did," he agreed. "All because you were willing to take a chance on a broken stranger who needed his saddle fixed." "And his heart," she added softly. "And my heart," he confirmed. "You mended both, and I have been grateful every day since." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the town where they had built their life together. Beatrice thought about that lonely young woman she had been, sitting in her workshop doorway, resigned to a life of solitude. She had not known that love was coming, that partnership and joy were just around the corner in the form of a tired cowboy with a broken saddle and a lonely heart. But he had come, and he had stayed, and together they had created something more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. Not just a successful business, but a family, a legacy, a love that had endured through decades and would continue through their children and grandchildren. "I love you," she said, the words as true and vital as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," Zachary replied. "Always have, always will." As the stars began to appear overhead, Beatrice leaned her head on Zachary's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. They had grown old together, their bodies slower and their hair gray, but the love between them was as strong as ever. Maybe stronger, forged and tempered by years of shared experience, challenge and triumph. The night was peaceful, filled with the sounds of Chico settling into evening. Somewhere in town, their grandchildren were being tucked into bed. In Sacramento and San Francisco, their own children were living the lives they had built, carrying forward the values of love, integrity, and craftsmanship that Beatrice and Zachary had instilled in them. It had all started with a saddle and a lonely heart, with two broken people finding each other at exactly the right moment. And from that beginning, they had built a lifetime of love, a family that would carry their story forward into generations they would never meet, but would shape through the example they had set. As they finally stood to go inside, Beatrice took one last look at the workshop down the street, still lit by lamplight as Samuel, and his son worked on finishing a commissioned piece. The legacy continued, the craftsmanship passed down, but more importantly, the love and partnership they had modeled was being lived out in new ways by new generations. "Ready for bed?" Zachary asked, offering her his arm. "Ready," she said, taking it gratefully. "Though I am not really tired. Just content." "Content is good," he said. "Content is very good indeed." They walked into their home together, two people who had traveled far from where they started, who had faced grief and loneliness and found each other on the other side. Who had built not just a business but a life, not just a marriage but a true partnership that had stood the test of time. The door closed behind them, and the light in their window glowed warmly into the night. Inside, they would make tea and talk about their day, maybe play the piano together or simply sit in comfortable silence. They would eventually make their way to bed, still sharing a room and a bed after 40 years of marriage, still finding comfort in each other's presence. And in the morning, they would wake up together and start another day, grateful for the time they had been given, for the love they had found, for the life they had built from broken pieces and lonely hearts. The saddle had been mended long ago, but the heart had healed into something stronger and more beautiful than it had been before it broke. This was their happily ever after, not perfect or fairy tale simple, but real and earned and filled with the kind of deep joy that comes from choosing someone every day and being chosen in return. They had mended each other, built with each other, grown old together, and their love story would live on in the children and grandchildren who carried pieces of both of them forward into the future. As Beatrice drifted to sleep that night in Zachary's arms, she thought about that young woman in the workshop doorway, waiting without knowing she was waiting. She wished she could tell her younger self that love was coming, that life was about to begin in ways she could not imagine. But then again, maybe the not knowing had been part of the magic. Maybe the surprise of finding love when she least expected it had made it all the sweeter. Either way, she was grateful, grateful for every moment, every day, every year they had been given together. The stars wheeled overhead. Time flowed on, and two hearts that had been mended and joined together beat in quiet synchronization through the peaceful night.